It is a Monday, and of course we start the week with good news. Why, yesterday we saw the signing of key agreements in the oil exploration of our country. This could have taken place, or was meant to take place, on the 22nd of last month, but was on the 17th of March when we saw Tanzanian President, the late Pombe Magufuli, therefore leave this earth or die. And therefore, we had to postpone, or this was postponed. But we thank God for the peaceful transition there, where we saw Samia Suluhu yesterday make her maiden visit out of Tanzania as the president, coming to Uganda, and the signing took place at State House in Entebbe. We must remember that it was in 2006 when we first made our first commercial discovery of oil. However, it has been a process, step by step, a few agreements by agreement, until yesterday when we saw actually those that give mandate to companies that we have Total, Sinok to carry on and now move with contracting here and there and procurement processes and so on. And now we are reliably informed that come 2025, Uganda will have our first oil. You know, this has been the talk. When are we getting our first oil? Run through the pipes all the way from Western Uganda to Tanga Port in Tanzania, and there we shall be now in total business of oil. Hopes are high, prayers are high that this happens. Remember, this is going to be record-breaking because it's going to be the longest oil pipeline that is electrically heated in the world. And this will be to transport our oil. So much was said and so much has been written, but we want to better understand the whole process. What are the opportunities for you as a Ugandan to benefit from this process? Of course, contracts have different terms and conditions, but we are going to try our best to look out for what is there for you, a person having a company in Uganda, a person to properly strategize so that you can benefit from this. And with me to discuss this is Gloria Sebikali, who is the Manager, Corporate Affairs and Public Relations Manager, that is at Petroleum Authority, Uganda. Gloria, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Ruben. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here on UBC. Good morning.
You must have had a busy weekend. Yesterday I had to spend a couple of hours glued as a responsible citizen on UBC TV watching the entire ceremony. And for how was your weekend yesterday with this big achievement for our country? For me and many Ugandans, it was an exciting weekend. A lot of the work that we have been doing culminated into the signing of the agreements yesterday, so it was exciting for us to be part and parcel of the process. Yeah. I guess church was done online then.
Of course, you know, with the SOPs, so most of us do our church online, so I had my service at 10 and then went straight in, tuned into UBC to catch the signing ceremony. Yeah. Well,
away from the weekend, we now go into giving an insight into the oil pipeline deal. But before we really discuss these agreements, Gloria, let's take just a background to this signing, because we know, yes, we had the major signing, but there have been events that have been unfolding till yesterday when the signing of these three important pipeline agreements were made.
Okay, Ruben, as you know, Uganda discovered commercial oil. So in order for us to become an oil-producing country, in order for us to reach first oil, as you mentioned, this oil has to be pumped out of the ground and commercialized. So there are a number of projects in the offing for us to produce the oil and then commercialize it. So to produce the oil, what we call the upstream projects, we have two main projects. That's Tilenga, that is being taken forward by Total, and Kingfisher project that is being taken forward by Sinok. So those two projects will develop the facilities required to produce oil. We need many wells, we need central processing facilities, we need infield pipelines to connect the different fields. So once all that infrastructure is in place, the oil will come out of the ground. So it's not enough to just have the oil come out of the ground. It has to be either refined so that we can get products like diesel, petrol that we use. So a refinery will be built in Hoima, so that's the first commercialization option. And then the second commercialization option is the East African crude oil pipeline. that we are currently talking about. So the East African crude oil pipeline is a 1,445 kilometer pipeline that will run from Hoima, that's close to where the oil has been discovered, up to Tanga in Tanzania, so that Uganda's crude oil can access the international market. So it will be buried. It will be the longest heated crude oil pipeline because our oil is waxy. It solidifies when it comes to the ground, when it's at room temperature. So it will be electrically heated, it will be insulated and buried. It will traverse about 10 districts from Hoima to Mutukula, the border. That's about 296 kilometers in Uganda, and then the rest of the distance will be in Tanzania. So the agreements that were signed yesterday were provided the commercial and legal frameworks for this pipeline.
Looking at, even before we go into the 3 agreements that were signed, let's first understand the significance of these agreements before we understand the content, a brief, because of course we cannot dive into the entire, but of course we'll be giving our viewers some of the importance in these agreements. The significance of this oil to Ugandans at such a time and the signing of this agreement.
Well, the significance of the agreements is they're important because, first of all, as I mentioned, the East African crude oil pipeline is a cross-border pipeline. It runs through Uganda and Tanzania. So before I talk about the agreements of yesterday, there's been a number of processes and agreements that have been signed right from the time when it was agreed that the route that Uganda's oil will take to access the international market would be through Tanzania. So when that was agreed in about 2016, in 2017 the first agreement related to this pipeline was signed, and that was the Inter-Governmental Agreement, which was signed between the governments of Uganda and Tanzania, basically saying that we 2 governments agree to develop this pipeline jointly. It gave basic principles, and so that was the first level of the agreement. So after we had that intergovernment agreement, we went into negotiations for what we call the host government agreements. So these host government agreements are signed between the developer, that is the company that develops ECOP, and the country, Uganda, and also another one between the company and the country, Tanzania. So we went into negotiations for 2 host government agreements simultaneously. And these were initialed last year, late last year, I think you recall. They were initialed in September in Uganda and in October in Tanzania. So those were between each country and the pipeline company. Now, that is the second level. Now we've gone further into what was signed yesterday. Yesterday, the host government agreement for Uganda was signed, and that is between, as I said, Uganda and the company. The second agreement that was signed was the Shareholders Agreement. And that means this is bringing together the different players, people who are going to participate in this pipeline. And then the third agreement that was signed was what we call the Tariff and Transportation Agreement. Maybe just for clarity, the shareholders in this project are the government of Uganda, represented by our Uganda National Oil Company, which handles the commercial business on behalf of government. Then we have the Tanzania Petroleum Development Corporation on behalf of the government of Tanzania. That is the second shareholder. And then we have CNOOC, the Chinese company, and Total. So those are the shareholders of the project. So the shareholders agreement was also signed yesterday, and it basically gives the rights and responsibilities of each of the shareholder, how will the governance be, how will the decision making be, and the like. Then the third agreement that was signed was the Tariff and Transportation Agreement. So this agreement basically looks at how the crude oil will be transported. You know, how will it be measured, the amounts, etc. And then also the tariff, because the business of the pipeline is to transport crude oil for a certain consideration, for a certain payment that will be made in form of a tariff. So this tariff and transportation agreement basically looks at the aspects related to transportation and how the tariff will be paid for the oil that will be transported in the pipeline. So it was signed between the company and the owners of the crude oil. The owners of the crude oil being Uganda and the government of Uganda, the oil companies, that's Total and CNOOC.
Well, maybe let me take you back to the shareholders agreement, if you're at liberty to explain. I've been looking through, and here we see that is the French company, which is Total, E&P, that is oil exploration, owns, that is 72%. Then we have government of Uganda, 15%. We have CNOOC, 8%, and Tanzania, 5%. For the benefit of our viewer to better understand, what does this mean in terms of shares? We see us who may believe that, yes, the oil exploration is being done in Uganda, so it is much of our oil, though we know CNOOC and Total will have put in something, we have a 15%.
I think it's important to appreciate that in developing the oil and gas sector and these different projects, we work closely with partners, partners who have the expertise, who can finance the different projects. So in 2014, when the Memorandum of Understanding for Commercialization of Uganda's crude, Uganda's oil and gas projects, oil and gas resources was signed, it was agreed that the development of the East African crude oil pipeline would be mainly private sector led. And so as a government, yes, we have a participating interest in the project, but given the nature of the project and the requirements, it was agreed that it would be private sector led in principle. So it's a good thing that we have different partners who are willing to invest in this project and the different infrastructure required. As a government, we are also taking shares in the projects, that is like the refinery, and then also we have also the upstream projects where Uganda has a participating interest through the Uganda National Oil Company. So we believe the country and the government and the people of Uganda are well represented here in the project.
Let's look at how much we are looking at in terms of investment and who are the partners here. Maybe that could also better explain to the Ugandan why we have these percentages.
Well, for the East African crude oil pipeline, the estimated capital investment required is about $3.5 billion. Of course, there are various studies that have been undertaken to come up with these projected figures, and so yes, we are looking at a project of about $3.5 billion. When you bring in the other commercialization projects like the refinery, which is an estimate of about $4 billion, then we have the upstream projects, the ones that I mentioned, that will be used to bring out the crude oil from the ground. That's Kingfisher and Tilenga. Also, the estimate is about $6 to $8 billion. So we see an investment. It's a project. It's a $15 billion project altogether. So it is significant for this country because, as you know, our GDP is around $30 billion as a country. So we are having a $15 to $20 billion project coming in. This is very, very important for us as a country, but also us for the region.
Let's look at the timeline. Of course, this has been, many Ugandans have been craving. And the question has been, we have so many hopes in our oil. One time the president, in a number of speeches, was attributing to when we finally have our oil, we shall have better facilities, we shall have this and that, because we'll be getting a lot of revenue out of this. So what time frame are we looking at?
Okay. Well, the construction phase of this project is estimated to take about 36 months That's 3 years from when we have the equipment mobilized on the ground and you see work taking place. So the construction would take about 36 months. So that's what we are estimating. But it's also important to appreciate that whereas we are looking at timelines and we are all looking forward to first oil, when that first barrel will be produced and pumped out of the ground, for us to benefit from this $15 billion project, a lot of emphasis needs to be placed on these 3 to 4 years when the height of construction will be, because that is when the capital inflow will be coming into the country. That is when a lot of the opportunities will be there for Ugandans. So whereas having first oil and having that first barrel of oil come out of the ground is very important for us as a country, even equally important is these 3-4 years when we are going to see construction and equipment hit the ground, because that is when a lot of the opportunities will be there for us as Ugandans.
You talked about opportunities for Ugandans. Can we deeper look into this? Yes, because we know this is our oil. Many may not belong to CNOC, may not work with Total, but what are some of those opportunities that the private sector can focus in, or Ugandans can look up to in these initial stages that you've talked about before we have our first oil?
Yeah, well, talking about the opportunities, I'll start from the employment perspective. As you mentioned, we may not all get jobs in Total, CNOC, and the like. The studies that we've undertaken as government and also by the oil companies indicate that approximately 160,000 new jobs will be created. Of course, we have millions of people, of youth unemployed, so that may not be as much as we need as a country, but it's a good starting point, because a lot of these jobs will be for skilled technicians and what we call the different trades and crafts, people with vocational skills but that are
welding,
certified. Yes, welding, pipe fitting, scaffolding, mechanical works, electrical works, plumbers. It is a lot of, over 70% of the jobs are for people within this category. So as a country, we are focusing on skilling of the youth, skilling of people to that required level, and a number of projects are currently taking place. So yes, there are not as many jobs, but there's a significant opportunity, first of all, to skill the youth, but also we are developing our vocational institutions to that standard, to international standards, so that the people that come out of these institutions are not only relevant to Uganda's oil and gas sector, but also can work internationally.
We have a policy that is protecting Ugandans into this, because many a times we've seen big projects here, and of course the jobs on paper are there. At one time when they were working on the Entebbe Express Highway, to my shock, I saw a foreigner driving us this truck, and I asked my colleague that, can't we have a Ugandan drive this truck? So on paper the jobs are there, but actually sometimes what happens is we see companies come with almost everybody that they need to do these jobs.
Well, that's very important. As the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, we are the regulator for the oil and gas sector, meaning that we monitor the activities to make sure there is compliance with the law and compliance with international best practice. And one of the key areas that we focus on is promoting and monitoring national content development, that is use of Ugandan goods and services. And our laws are very clear. Our laws provide priority, our petroleum laws provide priority for Ugandans, both in terms of employment and service provision. So when it comes to employment, we approve the organization structures for the companies. We also work with the Ministry of Internal Affairs in issuing work permits to foreigners coming to the country. There has to be proof that there's been a deliberate effort to recruit Ugandans before you bring on foreigners. And then also we have developed a tool called the National Oil and Gas Talent Register, whereby people with different skills, talents required in the sector can register for recruitment, so that you indicate your qualifications, your experience, so that when the opportunities are there, there is a central database. So this is a database that's free for anyone to register, and it's accessible online. So there are a number of things that we are doing.
I want you to lay more emphasis on that, because I know many people watching this show are eager to benefit from, of course, the profitable sector called oil and gas in this country. So how do they get to that database, so that as you peruse through, you can know that if you are looking for welders, a company full of welders, yes, Chirabo so and so company is there. So how do they get connected to this platform? Okay, so the platform, you can register online via our website, www.pau.go.ug. When you go under national content, you'll find the National Oil and Gas Talent Register. So you just register. It's an online process, and it's free of charge. Then the other thing that you talked about earlier is how can Ugandan businesses come into the sector. That is the other area of opportunity, use of Ugandan goods and services. At the highest level, at policy level, we've provided for that within our laws. We have required the companies to give priority to Ugandan goods and services. The law further ring fences 16 categories of goods and services that are specific for Ugandans, meaning that any company or its contractor cannot bring on a non-Ugandan firm in those categories. They are required to use Ugandans. We have things like transportation, land survey, ICT services, and the like. So there are 16 categories. So besides that, we are also working with various players to address the capacity gaps that have been identified among Ugandan SMEs. There are various training programs. There are supplier development workshops that are held by the oil companies that we actively facilitate. Some of these are aired here on UBC, whereby Ugandan companies and SMEs are taken through what some of the requirements are, where the business opportunities are, how to fill in a bid, how to develop your HSE, your health safety policy, so that it meets the required standards. What are the standards in place? We have worked closely with UNBS to document the standards required to supply certain goods and services. So there is a lot of work we are doing to ensure that Ugandan businesses can come into the sector. Then likewise, like I said, for the employment, there is a National Oil and Gas Talent Register. For the business entities, we have the National Supplier Database. The law requires that before you supply goods and services, or before the oil companies contract any company, that company has to be registered on the National Supplier Database. So this National Supplier Database is a register of entities, both Ugandan entities and foreign entities, that have potential to supply goods and services to the oil companies. So likewise, the registration process is done online via our website. For the different players for example, in the districts where operations are taking place in Hoima, Bulisa, the districts along the pipeline, we've held various campaigns, and we'll continue to hold these campaigns to help and facilitate registration by the different SMEs, so that they get visibility. Because when you go into the database, it categorizes these different entities. It said for maybe agricultural produce, we have this. For logistics, we have this. For this category, for providing of construction materials, we have these companies. So it gives visibility to these companies, so that when a player comes on grounds and says, I need this kind of service, which company is available, they can go to the database and see who is available. In case there are certain services where Ugandans don't have the capacity, joint ventures are encouraged. So foreign firms can enter into joint ventures with Ugandan companies to be able to maybe have the necessary skill, the necessary capital, in order to provide some of the higher level goods and services. Well, I'm happy there are opportunities, so please, wherever you are and you have a company that you feel can benefit from the services that are going to be offered, these are a number of jobs and opportunities there. Please ensure you get to the database, whether you can just read through. When opportunity strikes, you've positioned yourself very well to benefit from this, so that we don't just talk about oil and revenues, whereas the indigenous people are not benefiting. But Gloria, away from these agreements, the three that were signed, let's look at the host communities. In a couple of countries where oil has been more of a curse than a blessing, host communities feel left out. Apart from the developed infrastructure of roads, and then some people staying in a few hotels there, sometimes in areas gazetted for no entry. Recently, I saw a team in Parliament, and they had proposals they have put forward. They had funds they were demanding for that, included compensation and all this. How prepared are we to ensure a peaceful environment for our oil exploitation? Much as we've now gone to pipeline exploration, some of these gaps that later could trigger uncertainties.
That's a very important issue. All this infrastructure that we are talking about is going to be developed among communities. So the communities are very important, very part and parcel of the projects, of the development of the projects. So there are a number of ways in which we are engaging the communities to ensure that they move along with the projects, that they benefit from the projects. One, of course, that you have mentioned is related to compensation for the land that is being acquired for these projects. The land that is being acquired has been identified in all these areas, in Bulisa, in Hoima, in Chikube, and then along the 10 districts of the pipeline. The land, all the land required has been identified. And the way that the acquisition is done is that the companies develop what we call a resettlement action plan that identifies each and every person that is affected, what assets are affected, whether it is crops, structures, and then the land also that is affected. And so these are valued for the crops and the temporary structures. There are rates in place that are approved by the Chief Government Valuer and the Ministry of Lands. So these are used to compensate the people. For land, it's based on market value and prices. So besides just compensating them maybe with cash, for those whose primary place of residence is affected, new housing is constructed for them. In new housing is constructed for them within the same locality, but okay, of course, out of the project area. And then also, because we know that taking someone from where they're used to, relocating them affects their livelihood. There are a number of livelihood restoration programs that are implemented. For example, in Hoima and Chikure and Bulisa, there have been fish farming projects. We've had beekeeping projects. We've had improved agriculture projects, demonstration farms that have been set up. There's been financial literacy training that goes on throughout the compensation process, because some of these project affected persons are getting sums of money for the first time, so there's financial literacy training and the like. And so all that is done to ensure that we're able to restore the livelihoods of the people. Then also to ensure that the communities also benefit from some of these opportunities that we're talking about.
The kingdom there continuously expressing dissatisfaction and also trying to make a few demands. Yeah,
we do also engage the cultural institutions, but as I was saying, so that to have the communities benefit from some of the projects and the opportunities, there are different projects that are taking place. We have an agricultural development project that's taking place in Hoima, Bulisa, and Chikube districts, whereby certain agricultural value chains have been specifically identified, and communities are being helped to up their standards in terms of quality and quantity, being put together in cooperatives. How can they access certain equipment that they require in order to package their foodstuffs properly for the sector? So all this is being done on ground. Then also in the districts where the pipeline is passing, we are currently implementing a project under the African Development Bank to train over 500 SMEs MSMEs, small, medium enterprises, in order to up their game, get onto the standards, know what is required. So all that is going to in a bid to ensure that the communities are part of the project and are able to benefit from these developments.
Well, 3 agreements were signed yesterday where we saw Uganda government, Tanzanian government, and the 2 service providers here where we saw Sinok and that is Total doing the signing for this oil pipeline. As we wind up, of course time is not so much on our side, I want you to give assurance to Ugandans that we are going to have a blessing and not a curse regarding our oil exploration.
We, as government, we have put in place the required policy, regulatory and institutional frameworks to ensure that our sector is well managed. We have institutions with the required capacity that are in place. People have been trained. We have benchmarked internationally with both countries that have done well and those that have not done so well in the sector, so we know the different pitfalls. We are developing the sector in light of the need to promote national and local content so that people benefit and participate in the sector. So with all this in place, for sure the oil and gas sector is a blessing to the country, because we have lots of companies that have already participated, lots of people that are benefiting from the project. The challenges that may come in here and there have been identified, and as different stakeholders, if we all play our parts, if we all work with mutual respect together, then we will continue to drive the sector forward to ensure that it's a blessing to the country.
Thank you so much, Gloria Serikali, who is the Manager of Corporate Affairs and Public Relations, that is Petroleum Authority of Uganda, with whom we've been having an insight into the oil pipeline deal. The 3 agreements were signed. One of the things that has come out very clear is there are opportunities for you. Get your business on the database so that when opportunity strikes, you're prepared, they can peruse through, identify you, and you benefit as we wait for the first oil by 2025, where many of us will benefit from the revenues, therefore, after selling this oil. God bless you. I'll leave you with Ruben to take you through the world of sports. And don't forget, Jagena Semakula will be here to take you through Good Morning Uganda Extra. Stay safe. COVID is still around. And also, if you're in the group of immunization or one of those priority groups, please ensure you get your vaccination done. God bless you. See you tomorrow, same time.